Hey there. So I'm here with Lauren Spokane from the Synagogue Project. How are you doing today, Lauren?
Hey Jordan, I am doing well. Thanks. How are you?
Doing well and excited to talk to you. So the new Synagogue Project is building a spiritually vibrant, radically inclusive synagogue that reflects our vision for a world of justice, equity, and liberation. The community is being created by and for families with kids, couples and single people, queer and trans people, disabled and chronically ill people, deaf and hard of hearing folks, interfaith families, Jews of color and white Jews, Jews from many religious and secular backgrounds, and anyone interested in exploring and experiencing Jewish life. So, Lauren, you all have been a JLF grantee for a few years now. It's been great to see your work develop. And one part of your work in particular that you've highlighted the last few years in your application is the JOC space, which you all have been able to hire a part-time coordinator for, thanks in part to support from JLF. So tell me a little bit more about how that support or how that space has flourished in the last couple of years.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Well, first I should say that our Jews of Color space, our JOC space, has been a part of our structure from the beginning. So part of the vision for this community from when we founded, we're about to have our 7th annual membership meeting. So 7 years ago,
Congratulations.
thank you, was to for there to be JOC centered space within the congregation. And what we found over the years was that our kind of vision and aspiration for what that space would make possible was hard to match with the volunteer leadership capacity. And so actually, Kat Macias, who some of you may know, was our very first JOC lead on the board in our founding team of instigators, which is what we call our leadership body. And they had their original idea around, what if we had a staff position, like a JOC organizer, coordinator, and Emma Rafaelef, who is just now stepping off of our board after 6 years. She's termed out, the second person at NSP to term out. She kind of carried that ball forward and worked with me and other leaders, JOC space leaders, to kind of craft a vision for what this role would be. And we've been really lucky to find incredible people to fill the role. Monet Davis was our first JOC coordinator, who was already in our leadership and stepped into the staff role, and then went off to Portugal for grad school. And thankfully, we were able to pass the torch pretty quickly over to Elizabeth Narvaez, who is currently our JOC coordinator, and has actually expanded her role, now also does new member engagement. And under her leadership and partnership with Emma and other folks in the JOC space, she has been doing one-on-ones with Jews of color, Sephardi Mizrahi folks, multiracial families within the community. Last year, she did around 35 one-on-ones. And she was starting out with this goal around kind of assessing and a better understanding what are the experiences and needs of Jews of color and multiracial families in the community. And so out of that whole process, has grown new programming, established new partnerships within the congregation. Like there've been a few events between the JOC space and our queer space, like around Sukkot and Passover. So it's been more community building, programming, more leadership development, relationship building, and learning from those conversations that are being reported back to leadership about how we can best meet our aspirations around being a multiracial, liberatory, anti-racist congregation. And thanks to JLF for making all that possible, which has been huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Those all sound like very beautiful aspirations that sounds like you all are living into. Continuing sort of about affinity spaces, as you sort of hinted at, you do have a queer space and Sephardi Mizrahi affinity space as well. So tell me a little bit more about the story behind these affinity spaces more broadly and the role that they play within the New Synagogue Project community.
Sure. Yeah. So the queer space is another structure that was a part of our broader communal structure from the beginning. Around the JOC space, the need was identified from the beginning from Jews of color who were interested in being part of the congregation, but bringing, a healthy amount of skepticism from their experience being in white dominant Jewish communities or institutions in the past. And with the queer space, it's a little bit different in that often what I hear from queer folks in the community is, hey, NSP is a queer synagogue. Like, what do we need a queer space for? And like, it's a queer normative congregation. I would say I looked at the numbers, and since we started collecting demographic data in our new member sign up form a year ago, 60% of new members identify as queer. Wow. That said, there are folks in the community who really want to be a part of queer explicit spaces and also just different programming that centers and celebrates queer culture specifically. So there have been like film nights and social events like board game nights and picnics and also holiday programs, like I mentioned, either with the JOC space or not. Satyrs have been a part of a core like flagship queer space event from the beginning. Yeah, that's a queer space.
And the Sephardi Mizrahi space?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so that actually emerged, when we started the JOC space initially, we actually called it JOCISM. It was the Jews of Color Indigenous Sephardi Mizrahi space. And eventually a call was made by the JOC space leaders. That acronym is quite long, and we really
acronym is quite long.
Yeah, and we really want to make clear that we're centering Jews of color specifically. And so the name is kind of truncated. But from time to time, we would get questions like, hey, but where's my place? And we would say, oh, the JOC space is your space. And they'd say like, okay, really? I don't know if I belong there. And then it was about maybe a year and a half ago, we had the opportunity to bring Professor Devin Nar, who's a professor of Sephardic Studies at the University of Washington, an old friend and colleague of mine. He was in the area. We were able to snag him over to DC to give a lecture on the rise and fall of the Ladino left, which is a research project that he was working on. And we did a big communal lecture event, then also did a brunch with him the following morning, specifically for Sephardi Mizrahi folks in our community. And out of that conversation, Elizabeth did one-on-ones with folks who attended and who wanted to come, and identified an interest that folks had around really exploring and deepening their identity around their Sephardi Mizrahi roots. And one thing that came out of that was the idea, let's just create a conversation space. And in part because Elizabeth lives a few hours away in Charlottesville as a UVA grad student, and also because some of the folks who had been connecting were from different places and are around the DMV and beyond, we started a Zoom meetup. So actually anyone can join if you're interested. Find it on our website. Once a month, on a Tuesday evening, there's a facilitated conversation that Elizabeth leads, and then sometimes some in-person programming. So last year, the Sephardi Mizrahi space planned a Mamuna celebration, and someone who'd been participating on Zoom from, I think it was St. Louis, actually flew in to participate. It had been such a meaningful space for them. And one of the learnings from all of the relational meetings that Elizabeth has done is that, not everyone was able to quite see themselves in the title of JOC space, including folks who might consider Jews of color, who were like, I don't know if I'm Jewish enough. I don't know if I'm of color enough. And, I'll kind of wrestle with identities. And so that space has actually shifted its name to Kaleidoscope, which is something that Emma.
Wow, what a name! And that's cool.
Yeah. So to really reflect, we all have these different lenses through our identities, and it's meant to be an umbrella for folks who are outside of the Ashken normative experience and are impacted by that. So we now have the Sephardi Mizrahi space under that umbrella. This year we had a Black Jewish conversation space that I think will continue more in the coming year under our new JOC lead is Chelsea Thomas, who led that space. yeah, so that's kind of also a little bit about how these different spaces are connecting with one another.
Yeah, very cool. Love that name, Kaleidoscope. Very, very fun. Um, so, you all also mentioned in your application the role you all play, not just what you do in your own community, but the role you play with Synagogues Rising and networks of liberation-focused synagogues across the country that, include a few JLF grantees. So tell us a little bit more about the role you all play. What do you see as becoming possible through collaboration between these organizations?
Yeah, thanks. Well, Synagogues Rising emerged really in early pandemic days. There was a plan to do an in-person retreat that became a virtual retreat. So that was kind of the time in which we came together.
Classic
Um,
2020.
yes, indeed. A vision that Rabbi Arilev Fornari at Kol Tzedek and Rabbi Dev Noily at Kahila had around really, it kind of started with a desire for collegial support and kind of gathering with peers as rabbis who are doing really important, groundbreaking work. The role of a rabbi in any context can be pretty isolating and lead to burnout. And a lot of us are doing things that feel new, that are a little bit different than what other synagogues and Jewish leaders are doing. And so to have a space where we're learning from one another and supporting one another so that we don't feel alone and are not reinventing the wheel as we're trying to do things that are kind of broadly speaking new. And really seeing the role that we're playing in the broader movement ecosystem. So each of our congregations individually and also collectively are holding activists, organizers, creating space for spiritual grounding, moral courage. We play, I think, or can play a unique role with our institutional voice as a network of synagogues, and that's part of the vision, and just building the kind of liberatory Judaism that we want to be a part of and pass on to next generations.
Makes a lot of sense. So one of those collaborations I know kind of came out of that is the Shots Prayer Leader Cohort, something that you all are piloting, I think, just about now. A couple years ago, we actually did a feature on Kol Tzedek, one of the synagogues you just mentioned, part of Synagogues Rising, when they piloted this program. And I'm excited to be following up with it, having reached another one of our grantees, to be able to ask this kind of question. So for the uninitiated, can you tell us a little bit about the Prayer Leader Cohort?
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of back up around like where this comes from around our Jewish values, one of our values at NSP is Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam. Inside each of us is a sacred spark. So we believe fundamentally that spiritual leadership is for our rabbi and it's also for our members, for all of us. We're a leaderful community in lots of ways, including around spiritual leadership. So that's kind of the spirit around it. And we've had lay leaders leading from the Bima from the very beginning, 7 years ago at our very first service. And we've had a need for a way for people to who may have some background and skill and interest to lead, but aren't quite there yet to lead now. And just build a deeper bench that represents the diversity of the community. And Rabbi Yosef knew about Kol Tzedek's program from our relationship with Rabbi Monica Gomery and the other folks there. And we learned a lot from her and from their experience at KT. They were incredibly generous in sharing their materials and advice on how to tweak it based on their experience and our context. So we're now in the middle of our first cohort, which we're focused on Friday night services to start. We've got 8 folks who are in the cohort, 3 of whom have already signed up to lead services this summer. They've had 8 sessions so far. They were kind of coming together to talk about what does it mean to pray? What are we doing when we pray? And then learning the skills and practicing together, doing homework in between each session, leading with one another and offering feedback. They've had 8 sessions so far, and it's really exciting. We're really, really grateful to Kol Tzedek and really excited for what impact this is going to have in our community.
Yeah, well, tell me a little bit more about that. Like what is the broader impact that you see in the long run this program having on your community?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we do a lot of things at NSP, and the core of it is run spiritual practice and religious practice. So having more folks, diverse voices, in all kinds of ways, from different kinds of Jewish backgrounds, and people's own experiences to bring to spiritual leadership in our community is really valuable and important and meaningful. And the singing and the davening, it's really core to what we do. So really kind of tending to that heart and soul of what we do and who we are, is really, I think has a lot of potential, and I'm really excited to see the bench grow, and then the wider array of folks up front in the months.
Me too. I can't wait to see that either. So as we sort of get close to the end of the interview, I want to ask kind of one bigger, abstract question, more big picture. It's really cool to see the communication and conversation between JLF grantees generating projects with, such cool potential, for our communities and what they might look like. What does all of this make you imagine for our movement?
Yeah, I love that question. Well, one thing I think a lot about, particularly from where I sit in the broader ecosystem as someone who's building an institution, that we hope will be here for the long run, and in a network, a web of institutions, is that we have anchors in our broader movement, those structures, institutions that can hold people, and where we can be experimenting and trying new things, and then kind of settling into those practices and those visions around how we activate one another to be in action around our values, and also be the kinds of humans we want to be and relate to one another in the way that we hope to, and that is grounded in our values. So yeah, I feel excited about what transformation can come from the experiments that we're all a part of building, and see a really different kind of Jewish future emerging.
I can see it now. I can see it now. Awesome. That's beautiful, Lauren. Really appreciate it. If someone is in DC or apparently online anywhere else and just sees this interview and says, wow, this is awesome, I would love to get involved with NSP, or if they're just looking to support your work otherwise, how and where can they find you?
You can find us on our website, newsynagogueproject.org. You can find us on Instagram at New Synagogue Project. You can find us on Facebook. If you want to shoot me an email, my email is lauren@newsynagogueproject.org. And we hope to see you around.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Lauren. Have a great day.
Thanks, Jordan. You too.